The city square was alive with energy, tourists, street performers, and cameras everywhere. But when a group of cocky tourists spotted a street performer dressed as a royal guard, they saw an easy target. Laughing and live streaming, they tied him to a pole, humiliating him for clout, thinking they'd go viral for all the right reasons. Big mistake. Watching from the crowd was Ethan Cole, a seasoned security guard who had seen too many pranks go too far. Within seconds, he and his team stepped in hard, turning the tables in a way no one expected. The pranksters' smug grins vanished, but their humiliation was just beginning, because this time the internet wasn't laughing with them. They were the joke. Before we start the video, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The city square was alive with the usual chaos. Tourists snapping photos, street vendors calling out deals, and performers holding their ground, trying to carve out their place in the ever-moving crowd. Ethan Cole scanned the scene with practiced eyes, his security uniform crisp but worn in just the right places. He'd worked this beat long enough to know when trouble was brewing. His job wasn't about stopping major crimes. This wasn't some high-stakes action movie. His job was about keeping order, making sure no one got too bold, too reckless, too entitled, and that's exactly what he saw happening now. Across the square, standing as still as a statue, was Liam. He was one of the better street performers, dressed in a full Royal Guard uniform, red coat pristine, black bearskin hat. Perched high, his expression locked in perfect discipline. He never flinched, never broke character, no matter how close people got or how much they tried to provoke him. It was his act, and he was damn good at it. But then Ethan spotted them. A group of young tourists, their energy just a little too loud, their laughter a little too forced. The leader, some cocky influencer type with a camera mounted on a handheld stabilizer, grinned like a man who thought the world revolved around his followers. His friends, just as obnoxious, circled Liam like vultures sizing up a meal. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He knew the look. These weren't just tourists having fun. These were people who saw the world as content. The influencer stepped closer, camera aimed, smirking as he narrated. "All right, guys, we found one. The classic Royal Guard. Let's see if we can make him break." The others laughed, one of them waving a hand in front of Liam's face. Another clapped loudly near his ear. No reaction. Liam stood his ground, eyes locked straight ahead. Ethan didn't move in yet. He'd seen this kind of thing before. A little harmless taunting, a few annoying antics, and then they'd get bored and move on. But as seconds stretched on, he realized these guys weren't giving up. The influencer wasn't satisfied. He wanted a reaction. He wanted a moment. All right, he said, grinning. "Let's turn it up a notch." Before Ethan could take a step forward, one of the guys reached into a backpack and pulled out a handful of zip ties. Laughter rippled through the group as they moved fast, too fast. One grabbed Liam's arms, another yanked his coat, and within moments they had his hands bound behind him. The camera rolled, capturing every second. The influencer spun around to face it, arms outstretched in mock victory. "Ladies and gentlemen, we just captured a royal guard." Ethan's jaw clenched. That was enough. He moved in. Ethan moved with purpose, cutting through the crowd in long, steady strides. His radio crackled at his hip, but he ignored it. His focus was locked on the group of tourists still laughing, their camera rolling as Liam stood there, hands bound, his face an iron mask of control. He wasn't panicking, wasn't flinching, but Ethan could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders pulled tight. He was enduring this, but that didn't make it right. The influencer spun back toward his audience, still grinning like an idiot. "All right, guys, drop a comment if you think we should leave him like this for—" "Oh, crap!" His voice faltered as his eyes landed on Ethan, who was already closing the final few steps between them. The moment the security guard appeared, the mood shifted. The influencer's cocky confidence wavered, and his friends exchanged uneasy glances. They had pushed it too far, and they knew it. Ethan didn't waste time. His voice was calm, steady, controlled. "Take the zip ties off, now." One of the guys let out an awkward chuckle. "Dude, it's just a joke. Relax." Ethan didn't blink. Now, there was no question in his tone, no room for argument. The leader hesitated, then gave a forced laugh, trying to save face for the live stream. All right, let's not get dramatic. He motioned to one of his buddies. Cut him loose, slicing through the plastic restraints with a few awkward tugs. The zip ties snapped and Liam's arms dropped to his sides. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge them, just stood his ground, still embodying the silent discipline of the role he played. Ethan took a step closer, his presence towering over them. You think this is funny? The influencer shrugged, the bravado creeping back into his smirk. Hey man, it's just content. No harm, no foul. Ethan's eyes didn't move from his. You put your hands on a performer. You restrained him. That's assault, the smirk flickered. Whoa, let's not throw legal terms around. Shut up. Ethan's voice was low, sharp. You wanted a viral moment? You got it. A ripple went through the crowd. Until now, most of the bystanders had just been watching, unsure if this was some staged act. But now, people were filming, not just the tourists. The crowd was turning on them. Murmurs spread, disgusted glances replaced entertained smirks. The pranksters weren't the stars of the show anymore. They were the villains. One of them, a girl, who had been laughing seconds ago, suddenly hissed at the leader. Dude, stop smiling. People are pissed. Ethan tilted his head. Maybe you should be, too. The influencer clenched his jaw, his camera still rolling. But for the first time, he looked uncertain, and it was about to get a lot worse. The air in the square had shifted. What started as an audience laughing at a harmless street performance had turned into something else, something heavier. The tourists weren't just pranksters anymore. They were bullies. And now, the crowd was starting to realize it. Ethan didn't move, didn't break eye contact with the influencer, still holding his camera like a lifeline. The guy was squirming now, his confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. His audience had seen him in control, laughing, making a fool out of Liam for fun. But now, the tables had turned and everyone was watching him fall apart. A bystander spoke up, a middle-aged man with a thick accent, his arms crossed tight. That's not a prank, that's a crime. A woman next to him nodded. This is disgusting. Why would you think this is okay? The influencer forced out a laugh, waving them off. Oh, come on. It's just a joke, lady. You guys are acting like we mugged the guy or something. Ethan took another step forward, his presence suffocating. You bound his hands and left him defenseless. That's not a joke. The influencer opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, one of his friends, the nervous one who had cut Liam loose, grabbed his arm. Dude, we need to go. His voice was low, urgent. For the first time, the leader seemed to really look around. Not just at Ethan, but at the growing sea of phones aimed directly at him. He had built his whole career off of controlling the narrative, but now the narrative was controlling him. He wasn't the one filming anymore. He was the one being filmed. One of the bystanders muttered, "Let's see how he likes it." Liam, still standing tall, adjusted his coat. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than anything the influencer could have said. The influencer's cocky grin had completely vanished. His eyes darted between the cameras, his mind racing. He still had thousands of people watching live, but now, instead of cheering him on, the comments were flooded with disgust. He pulled his phone out, his hands moving fast, trying to end the live stream. But it was too late. A sharp buzz cracked. Through the tension, Ethan's radio. "Cole, status." Ethan didn't take his eyes off the influencer as he pressed the button. "Send backup." The color drained from the influencer's face. Wait, what? "You're calling? You wanted attention," Ethan said, voice like steel. "Now you've got it." The girl from the group let out a curse, grabbing the influencer's arm. "We need to go, now." The influencer's camera was still rolling, but the crowd wasn't looking at him like a star anymore. They were looking at him like prey, and this show wasn't over yet. The influencer's breath quickened. His fingers fumbled with his phone as he finally managed to end the live stream, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. His own followers had turned against him, and the crowd in front of him wasn't letting up. Everywhere he looked, more phones were pointed at him. recording, capturing, documenting every second of his downfall. His friends were starting to panic. The nervous one, who had cut Liam free, was already backing away, muttering something about how they should leave. The girl who had been laughing earlier now had her hoodie pulled up, her face turned away from the cameras. They weren't influencers. They weren't built for this kind of attention, but he was. And for the first time, he realized how brutal it could be when it wasn't arms crossed, unmoved. He had seen it before, arrogance melting into fear, confidence crumbling into regret. He wasn't here to play games. He was here to make sure these kids understood what they had done. A ripple ran through the crowd as two more security officers arrived, their uniforms sharp, their expressions unreadable. The tourists froze. This was real. The first officer, a tall woman with a no-nonsense stance, glanced at Ethan. "These the ones?" Ethan nodded. "That's them." The influencer's voice finally cracked. "Okay, seriously, what's the big deal? We didn't hurt him. It was just a prank, man." Ethan let out a slow breath, barely restraining his irritation. That prank could have gotten someone hurt. You restrained a man against his will. You embarrassed him in front of a crowd. That's not entertainment. That's harassment. The second security officer, a stocky man with a radio clipped to his vest, stepped forward. "We'll need to take statements." The influencer's bravado shattered. "Statements?" The girl grabbed his sleeve, whispering harshly, Are we getting arrested?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The weight of the moment was hitting them hard now. They had gone too far, and now the consequences were catching up. Liam, still in character, finally took a small step forward. He didn't say a word, didn't break his royal guard persona. He just looked at them, the kind of look that cut through excuses and forced a person to face themselves. The influencer couldn't hold his gaze. He looked away, his jaw tight, his fingers clenching the camera he no longer wanted to hold. Ethan watched him struggle, then gave him a final, quiet warning. "You don't control this story anymore. The internet does, and it's not gonna forget." The influencer swallowed hard, because he knew Ethan was right, and his nightmare was just beginning. The influencer's hands were shaking now. He wasn't live streaming anymore, but it didn't matter. He could already feel the damage spreading, unstoppable like wildfire. Every second that passed, more people in the crowd uploaded their own footage. The internet was already eating him alive, and he hadn't even left the scene yet. One of the security officers, the tall woman, pulled out a notepad. "Names," the influencer scoffed, trying to muster some of his usual confidence. "Are you serious? Look, we'll just leave, all right? No harm, no foul." The stocky officer wasn't having it. "You think this works like that? You physically restrained someone. You humiliated them for entertainment. You broadcast it. There's no just walking away." The girl in the group grabbed the influencers. Please just give them your name. Let's just get out of here." But the influencer was still clutching at control. Okay, fine. We apologize. There, we're sorry." He turned toward Liam, waving a hand dismissively. "Dude, no hard feelings, right?" Liam didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just stood there, a living symbol of unshaken dignity. Ethan smirked slightly. "That's not how this works. You don't get to decide when this ends." The influencer's patience snapped. "Oh, come on. People do way worse stuff on the internet every day. This is overblown. You're acting like we committed a crime." Ethan's gaze was ice cold. "You did." That was when it finally sank in. The influencer's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked around wildly, searching for someone, anyone, to back him up. But his friends were silent now, staring at the ground, their faces pale. A murmur ran through the crowd as a group of police officers entered the square, moving toward them with measured steps. The security officers stepped aside, letting them through. The influencer panicked. Whoa, okay, we don't need the cops. This is getting way out of hand." One of the officers, an older man with a no-nonsense expression, stopped in front of the group. "We received multiple reports about an incident here. Who's in charge?" The influencer pointed frantically at Ethan. "Him! He's security, right? He can handle it, right? We don't need—" Ethan shook his head. "No, you do." The crowd was dead silent now. The influencer's entire world was caving in on itself. His whole life had been about going viral, chasing clout, doing whatever it took to get attention. Well, now he had it. The police officer glanced at Liam, then at Ethan. "Is there footage?" Ethan gave a slow nod. "Plenty. The influencers." Breathing shuddered. He had finally realized the truth. He wasn't just trending, he was done. The influencer stood frozen, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The cameras were still rolling, but now they weren't his cameras. The crowd wasn't his audience. The internet wasn't laughing with him anymore. It was laughing at him. The police officer flipped. Open a notepad, his gaze sharp. "We'll need statements. Let's start with the Slowly, with deliberate precision, he adjusted the cuffs of his red coat, straightened his shoulders, and then, for the first time, looked directly at the influencer. The stare hit like a sledgehammer. It wasn't angry. It wasn't smug. It was disappointment. The kind that crawled under your skin and stayed there. The kind that told you, without a single word, that you weren't worth his time. The influencer swallowed hard, looking away. Ethan stepped in. "Liam, do you want to press charges?" The performer was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a single word, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. The influencer's stomach dropped. One of his friends let out a small, choked sound. The nervous one, the guy who had cut Liam free, stepped back like he wanted to run. The girl in the group turned away, covering her face, realizing exactly what was happening. The influencer tried one last time to salvage what was left. "Okay, listen," he said, forcing a chuckle. "We're all just blowing this out of proportion. No one actually got hurt." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "That's not your call to make." The police officer didn't even look up from his notepad. "You're coming with us, now." The influencer's breath hitched. "Wait," he stammered, taking a step back. "Wait, this is insane. It was a joke. It wasn't even that bad. People prank these guys all the time." "You tied him up," Ethan said flatly. "What if he had fallen? What if something worse had happened?" The influencer opened his mouth, but there was no comeback this time, because deep down, beneath all the arrogance and bravado, he knew Ethan was right. The officer gestured to another cop who stepped forward, pulling out a pair of cuffs. "Turn around." The influencer's face drained of color, his hands lifted instinctively like he was about to push the officer away, but he knew better. Instead, he stood there, shaking, humiliated, as the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Crowd was still watching, still filming. But they weren't mocking him anymore. They were watching justice unfold. As the officer led him away, Ethan caught one last look at his face and saw pure terror, because this time the joke was on him. The influencer's breath was uneven as the cold metal of the handcuffs locked around his wrists. His face burned, not just from humiliation, but from the realization that this wasn't some joke that would blow over. The crowd parted as the police led him away, their phones still. Recording, still broadcasting. This time, he wasn't the one controlling the content. He was the content. His friends hesitated, their feet frozen in place as they watched him get pulled toward the waiting police car. The girl, the one who had been laughing just minutes ago, now had her arms wrapped around herself as if shielding herself from the weight of what was happening. The nervous one, the guy who had been the first to panic, took a step back, then another. He looked like he wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The police officer who had spoken before turned to the rest of them. "And you three, you're coming with us too, witnesses and accomplices." The girl snapped her head up. "What? We weren't the ones who—" Ethan cut in, his tone sharp. "You stood there, you filmed it, you laughed." The girl's face crumbled and she turned away, tears pooling in her eyes. The nervous one stammered, "But I cut him loose. I tried to stop it." Ethan studied him for a long second. "Yeah? And what would have happened if security hadn't stepped in? Would you have stopped him before or after the damage was done?" The guy had no answer. His shoulders sagged. Liam stood just a few feet away, still unmoving, still unreadable. The same silent dignity he had maintained through the entire ordeal hadn't faltered once. Even now he didn't gloat, didn't react to their downfall because Liam didn't need to. The world was reacting for him. One of the bystanders, an older woman with a sharp look in her eye, shook her head. "They thought they were so clever. Look at them now." Another man muttered, "Guess they wanted to be famous. Hope they enjoy it." Ethan didn't smirk, didn't feel any satisfaction in seeing them squirm. He had no patience for bullies, no sympathy for people who thought cruelty was entertainment, but he also knew this was bigger than just them, because the internet never forgets, and right now, the internet was watching them fall apart. The cops led the rest of them away, one by one. The influencer, once the loudest person in the square, was now completely silent. His camera, his most prized possession, hung useless from his shoulders, swinging with every step he took toward the police car. Ethan exhaled, turning to Liam. "You good?" Liam met his eyes, held his gaze, and then, just barely, he nodded. Because justice had to disperse, but the energy in the square still crackled like electricity. People whispered, murmured, shaking their heads as they watched the police cars disappear into the city streets. Some scrolled through their phones, watching the footage in real time, replaying the downfall of a man who had built his entire life on exploiting moments just like this. Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. The situation was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Liam still hadn't spoken. He stood there, straight-backed, his red uniform pristine, his expression unreadable. To anyone else, he looked exactly the same as he had before the incident. Stoic, disciplined, unmoved. But Ethan had been in this job long enough to see beneath the surface. He stepped up beside him. "You all right?" Liam didn't look at him immediately. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, straightened his coat, making sure every inch of his uniform was as it should be. Control, precision, order. Then finally, he turned his head slightly. "I am now." Ethan nodded. It was enough. Few stragglers still lingered in the square, talking amongst themselves. Ethan caught bits and pieces. That guy's career is over. He deserves worse. He thought he was untouchable. One of the street vendors, an older man who had been running his stall in the square for years, walked up and clapped a hand on Liam's shoulder. "You handled that like a pro, son." Liam didn't respond, but he gave the man a short nod of acknowledgement. Ethan watched the way the tone in the square had shifted. Liam wasn't just a street performer anymore. He wasn't just a man in a uniform, standing still for tips and photos. He had become something else, a symbol, a man who had been publicly humiliated, mocked, and tied up for the world to see, only to stand there, completely unshaken, as justice rolled in on his behalf, and the internet had seen it all. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened up a social media app. The video was already trending. Different angles, different uploads, all with the same common theme. The influencer wasn't the hero of his own story anymore. Liam was. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. The guy had spent his entire career chasing viral moments, orchestrating them, twisting them in his favor. But he had miscalculated this time. He hadn't just lost control of the footage, he had lost control of the narrative. And now, the internet was tearing him apart. Ethan glanced back at Liam, who was already repositioning himself in the square. Back in character, back in his role, as if nothing had happened. Ethan exhaled, crossing his arms. Guess they got their viral moment after all. Liam didn't respond. He didn't need to. The world was already speaking for him. The fallout began immediately. Within an hour, the influencer's name was everywhere, but not in the way he had planned. His live stream had been ripped, re-uploaded, dissected and analyzed by thousands of people. His own audience, once devoted to his reckless antics, was now turning on him. Ethan scrolled through his phone, watching the damage unfold in real time. This is disgusting. Who even finds this funny? Tying someone up. That's not a prank, that's assault. Unfollowed. This dude is done. The hashtag Justice for the Guard was trending, and alongside it, dozens of reaction videos had already surfaced. Some showed Liam's unshaken reaction. Others highlighted Ethan and the security team stepping in. But the most damning ones They were compilation edits of the influencer's past stunts, all the times he had humiliated strangers, staged confrontations, and pushed boundaries for views. Ethan shook his head. The guy had built his career on weaponizing the internet, and now the internet was weaponizing itself against him. He scrolled further. The influencer had finally posted a response, a panicked, poorly written apology note in his Instagram stories. "Hey guys, I just want to clear the air. Things got a little out of hand today, and I realize now that my prank might have been a bit too much. I never meant to offend anyone, and I truly respect performers and the work they do. This was all just meant to be fun, but I see now that some people took it the wrong way. I'll do better." Ethan exhaled sharply. Pathetic. The comment section under his last video was brutal. "Oh, so now it's just a prank when you're the one getting roasted. You don't respect anyone, you just got caught. Delete your channel, dude. You're done." Sponsorships were dropping him, followers were abandoning him, and worst of all, his fellow influencers, the ones who used to support him, were turning their backs. They could smell the downfall, and no one wanted to be dragged down with him. Ethan locked his phone and glanced over at Liam, still standing there, still composed. The same stoic presence as always, but this time the respect in the air was different. People weren't just watching him now, they were approached, hesitant. One of them, a woman with a camera, didn't try to poke or tease him. She simply stood beside him, smiling softly, and took a respectful photo. Ethan watched as more people followed suit. No one was mocking him anymore, because Liam wasn't just a performer now. He was a reminder that dignity couldn't be stolen, that humiliation could backfire, and that sometimes justice delivered itself. By the next morning, the influencer's career was in freefall. News articles had picked up the story. Major channels were covering it, and commentary videos were ripping him apart. Every second of his downfall was being analyzed, mocked, and replayed in slow motion. Ethan sat in his office, scrolling through the damage. The influencer's subscriber count was plummeting in real time, a visible counter ticking. Down with each refresh, sponsors were dropping him faster than he could apologize. His latest attempt at damage control, a stiff, emotionless apology video, was being ratioed into oblivion. "Hey guys, I just wanted to come on here and say, I've had some time to reflect. I realize now that my actions weren't okay. I let the pressure of making content get to me, and I crossed a line." The comments were ruthless. "You let the pressure get to you? Nah, you let being a trash human get to you. Imagine apologizing only because you got caught. Bro is speed-running career destruction." Ethan leaned back in his chair. It was over. The influencer hadn't just made a mistake. He had revealed himself, and once the internet decided who you were, there was no escaping it. A knock on the office door pulled him from his thoughts. One of his fellow security officers, the tall woman from the day before, poked her head in. "You see the latest update?" Ethan raised a brow. "What now?" She tossed her phone onto the desk. A new video was trending. It was the influencer, but not his own upload. Someone had leaked the moment he was taken into the station. The footage showed him sitting on a metal bench in the processing area, head in his hands, shaking. No cameras, no audience, no fake confidence. Just a man realizing he had lost everything. The caption? "Reality hits different when the cameras are off." Ethan let out a low whistle. "Damn," the officer nodded. Guess he finally got his viral moment. Ethan locked the phone and stood up, stretching. He had seen internet cancellations before, but this one was different. It wasn't just people turning against him, it was people learning from him. Cautionary tale, a reminder that fame wasn't immunity, that the internet had the power to build you up or destroy you, and right now, it was finishing the job. Ethan left the office, stepping back out into the city square. Everything had returned to normal. Tourists milled about, performers held their ground, and the energy of the city moved on without hesitation. And Liam, still there, still silent, still untouchable. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. Some people had to learn things the hard way, but Liam, he had known all along. A week passed, and the city square felt different. not in any grand, obvious way, but in the small shifts, the way people moved, the way they interacted. The energy had changed. Ethan noticed it almost immediately. There was more caution now, a hesitance in the way tourists approached performers. Where people used to push limits, eager for a reaction, they now seemed more aware, as if remembering. What had happened last time, someone had crossed the line, but the biggest change. Liam, he was still in his usual spot, standing with the same impenetrable stillness. But now the way people looked at him had shifted. Before, he had been a spectacle, a challenge, an object of curiosity, someone to prod at for amusement. Now, he was respected. Tourists no longer tried to provoke him. Instead, they took pictures from a distance. Some even nodded at him before walking away, as if silently acknowledging what he had endured. The city had turned him into something more. A few feet away, Ethan leaned against a lamppost, watching the way things played out. He didn't usually stay in one spot for long, but today he wanted to see it for himself, to witness the long-term effect of what had happened. As he scanned the crowd, he caught sight of a young man, maybe in his early 20s, standing near Liam. He wasn't filming, wasn't trying to make a scene. He just stood there, staring at Liam with something close to admiration. Then, without a word, the young man reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded bill, and dropped it into Liam's collection box. Not out of pity, but out of respect. Ethan smirked. Progress. He checked his phone out of habit, already knowing what he would see. The influencer was still gone. His social media accounts were a wasteland. His follower count decimated, his sponsors long gone. His last post had been a feeble attempt at a comeback, a pathetic plea for forgiveness, leaving him behind in the wreckage of his own mistakes. And Liam, he was still here, still standing. Ethan pushed off the lamppost and walked toward him. He didn't expect a response. Liam never broke character. But as he passed, he muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Told you it'd work itself out." Liam didn't move, didn't speak. But for the first time since the incident, Ethan swore he saw the corner of Liam's mouth twitch, a near smile. Almost imperceptible, Ethan chuckled to himself and kept walking. Because in the end, some people didn't need to say anything. The world would speak for them. A month later, the city square had fully returned to normal. The performers were in their usual spots, tourists bustled through the streets, and the air buzzed with the usual energy of movement and noise. But something had changed. It wasn't just the way people looked at Liam now, it was the way they treated him. Ethan had seen it time and time again. People came and went, but respect, that stayed. And Liam, the silent performer who once stood as a target for people's cheap entertainment, had become a symbol. Ethan watched as a group of teenagers walked by, their phones out, laughing among themselves. A few months ago, they might have tried to provoke Liam, tested his patience for the sake of a reaction. But now, one of them turned, raised his phone, and snapped a photo from a respectful distance. Another one nudged him and muttered, "Don't be a jerk about it." The message had stuck. Ethan leaned against the same lamppost he always did, arms crossed, watching it all unfold. He wasn't the kind of guy to get sentimental, but he couldn't deny it. He liked seeing things set right. A few tourists approached. Liam's collection box, dropping in bills without a second thought. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Ethan checked his phone out of habit, flicking through social media. The influencer was still gone. His accounts were dead zones. His last desperate attempt at an apology video had been torn apart. By commentary channels, his reputation reduced to a footnote in internet history. A cautionary tale of arrogance meeting its inevitable collapse. The world had moved on. But Liam? Liam was still here. The thought made Ethan smirk. Some people spent their whole lives chasing significance. They'd do anything for it. Humiliate others, cross lines, push limits, just to matter for a moment. And yet here Liam was, silent, still, unshaken, and in the end, he had won. A few feet away, a mother and her young son walked past. The little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at Liam. "Mom, why doesn't he move?" The mother smiled softly. "It's his job. He's strong." The little boy watched for a moment longer, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a single coin. Carefully, he stepped forward and dropped it into Liam's box. Liam didn't react, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge it. But Ethan saw the slight shift in his posture, the weight of the moment, the understanding that respect wasn't just given, it was earned. Ethan turned away, walking into the crowd, satisfied, because in the end, Liam hadn't needed to say a single word. The world had said it for him.